Welcome to Nocturne Historia. In the time before time, when existence was nothing more than a whisper in the void, there stretched an endless case, not mere emptiness, but a restless, swirling sea of potential. Darkness existed before darkness had a name, and from that vast abyss stirred the first breath of creation. It was here that Gaia emerged, the Earth Mother, not born but formed, coalescing from the void like a dream rising from the slumber of eternity. Her very first breath carved space into the fabric of the formless, and with it came Tartarus, the antithesis of her embrace. A depth so profound, so cold, so final, that to fall into it would require 9 days and 9 nights of descent, and still one might never reach its bottom. But chaos would not remain unbound. From the tension between void and form came Eros, not love as we know it, but the raw force of attraction, the pull that compels dust to form stars and stars to birth worlds. Eros stirred chaos into purpose, drawing Gaia and Tartarus into the first cosmic tension. As creation unfolded, Gaia gave birth to Uranus, the sky arched in starlight, who cloaked her in his celestial presence. Their union bore the Titans, the first divine generation who would rule before the age of Olympians. But while creation flourished above, the depths below remained changeless, eternal. Tartarus became the mirror opposite of the heavens, a prison waiting for judgment, a womb of punishment yet to awaken. From the primordial murk emerged Nyx, goddess of night, and Erebus, the embodiment of darkness. Their children, Ether, the pure upper air, and Hemera, the day, would complete the eternal cycle of light and shadow. Yet Nyx never abandoned her roots in the deep. Her power remained entwined with Tartarus in a way no god would ever fully comprehend. Time moved differently then, not in hours or seasons, but in epochs. The Titans ruled under Cronus, who overthrew his father Uranus in a storm of divine rebellion. But fate had already set in motion a thread of prophecy. Cronus, warned he would be betrayed by one of his own, devoured his children, until Rhea, in a desperate act of defiance, hid away the youngest, Zeus. Raised in secret on the sacred island of Crete, Zeus grew strong, and when the time came, he rose against his father. Not alone, but with allies. Some Titans who turned against their kin, and others far more ancient. For 10 years, the heavens trembled in the Titanomachy, a war of thunder against stone, of destiny clashing with tradition. The turning point did not come from brute strength alone, but from wisdom. Zeus descended into Tartarus, freeing the Cyclopes and the Hundred-Handers, beings his father had cast into the abyss in fear. In gratitude, they forged him weapons of unimaginable power, including the thunderbolt, the signature of his reign. When the Titans fell, their punishment matched their hubris. It was not Olympus that held them, but Tartarus, the waiting void that finally received its purpose. The abyss that had watched patiently since the first breath of creation now became the vault of cosmic justice. In this, the cosmos completed its first act, from formless chaos to structured order, from eternal night to the rhythm of light and shadow. And Tartarus, once only depth, became destiny. When the Titans fell, their punishment was not a swift exile, but an eternal imprisonment in the black hollows of Tartarus. Their fury and defiance, once unleashed across the cosmos, became trapped echoes that would form the spiritual foundation for all future suffering. With the war over, creation stood at a turning point. A new order was needed. The three divine brothers, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, gathered to divide the cosmos. According to myth, they cast lots from a bronze helm to determine their realms. But was it truly chance? Or was it destiny wearing the mask of randomness? Zeus claimed the heavens and took his seat atop Mount Olympus, the Sky Father overseeing all that moved beneath him. Poseidon inherited the sea, a realm of shifting mystery and fathomless power. And to Hades, the eldest, fell the Underworld, the kingdom of the dead. Some claimed he drew the shortest lot, receiving the darkest domain. Others whispered it was no accident, that sovereignty over death was always his birthright, and the lot merely confirmed what fate had already written. Whatever the truth, the god accepted his domain not with resentment, but with solemn understanding. The journey to the underworld was more than physical. As Hades descended through rock and shadow, through caverns that devoured light and sound, he was changed. Not corrupted, but deepened. No longer the god of Olympus, he was becoming something else, an embodiment of finality, of gravity, of inevitable return. At the deepest point, where even the earth seemed to hold its breath, he established his throne. Forged of obsidian and adamantine, materials that had never known the sun, his seat was not golden or adorned, but absolute, unmoving, eternal. Round him, the kingdom began to form. Caverns widened to become halls of judgment. Tunnels branched like veins, anticipating the rivers to come. His realm was not chaos, it was purpose, shaped by the laws of consequence. While his brothers ruled domains filled with movement and life, his dominion was silence and memory, and yet he felt no envy. For in time all paths, mortal and divine, led to him. That was the deeper truth. His authority was final, unavoidable, and so the world found balance. Sky, sea, and underworld, each with its appointed sovereign, but Hades' realm was far from empty. To rule the dead, he would need boundaries, guardians, and rivers, currents that would shape the very essence of death. The first to emerge was Styx, the sacred river born of hatred and necessity. Its waters carried the power of binding oaths so strong, even the gods feared to break them. To swear by Styx was to stake one's divinity. And should that oath be broken, the punishment was 9 years of silence, stripped of power, exiled from the councils of Olympus. Even Zeus himself obeyed that law. Next came Lethe, the river of forgetting. Pale and slow, it whispered oblivion. Its waters dissolved memory like rain dissolves chalk. Some souls drank deliberately, choosing peace over pain. Others stumbled into its current unknowingly, their identities slipping away like dreams in morning light. The river did not judge. It simply offered what many sought: release. And so the realm of the dead was taking form, not as a place of horror, but of truth, a geography shaped not by whim, but by the deep structure of consequence, of memory, and of forgetting. After Lethe's gentle forgetfulness, there came Acheron, the river of pain. Its dark currents were thick with echoes of grief, not just the cries of the dead, but the accumulated sorrow of the living. Where Lethe offered release, Acheron demanded recognition. Every soul that approached its banks was forced to confront its own ending. Here, mortality was not erased but affirmed. Only by acknowledging the finality of life could a soul begin its journey beyond it. Then rose Phlegethon, the river of fire, not a destructive blaze, but a cleansing flame that burned without consuming. Liquid fire coursed across stone and through void, a divine paradox that purified even as it scorched. Those condemned to torment would know its searing kiss, while others merely glimpsed its distant glow, reminded that some divine truths remain forever untouchable. Finally came Cocytus, the river of lamentation. Its icy flow carried the cries of the mournful, not just tears, but the very essence of despair. It preserves sorrow like amber preserves time, creating an eternal record of every unhealed wound. Cocytus became the final boundary of Tartarus, the last threshold before the most profound punishments. With the 5 rivers established, the underworld was no longer just a realm, it was a complete system, governed by order and necessity. Hades, the silent sovereign, began populating this world of endings with those who would maintain its structure. First came Charon, the ancient ferryman. With hollow eyes and hands weathered by eternity, he took his place along the black waters of Styx. To the living, he was a figure of dread. But to the dead, he was a guide, a boatman whose silence offered strange comfort. He accepted only those whose passage had been earned, turning away all others with a gaze as heavy as the river itself. Then came Cerberus, the 3-headed hound, whose body defied the laws of nature. Each head bore its own role, one to bar the living, one to trap the dead, and one to acknowledge those whose journey had reached its rightful end. His growl echoed like thunder beneath the earth, and even the bravest heroes hesitated at the sound of his breath. In the great halls of judgment appeared 3 souls chosen for their wisdom in life: Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Aeacus. No longer kings, they now served as arbiters of truth. Minos, with his sharp intellect, could unravel the most tangled webs of ethics. Rhadamanthus judged with unwavering strictness, holding each soul to the highest standards. Aeacus, the most empathetic of the 3, brought balance, understanding the weight of circumstance while still honoring divine law. Beyond them stood two figures who had long moved between the worlds of gods and mortals, Thanatos and Hypnos, death and sleep. Thanatos, the end incarnate, marked the final heartbeat of every living thing. Hypnos, his twin, ushered mortals into nightly stillness, softening the terror of death with the familiarity of dreams. Together they created a rhythm, a breath in and a breath out, between awareness and oblivion. Then came the Erinyes, known later as the Furies. Born from the blood of Uranus when Cronus struck him down, they emerged as spirits of vengeance. Alecto, the relentless one, Megara, bearer of grudges, Tisiphone, the avenger of blood. Their names became warnings in mortal prayers. Unlike most underworld denizens, the Furies moved between worlds. They did not wait for souls to arrive. They hunted. Whenever justice cried out in agony, they answered. Their presence was not chaos, but necessary correction. And as these roles were appointed, the underworld took on structure. Halls of judgment rose from rock without mortal tools. Chambers expanded to house the countless souls arriving each day. The architecture of death matched the architecture of justice, measured, eternal, and absolute. Through silent will, the underworld continued to shape itself. Passages carved into stone like veins through a sleeping titan, each one designed to guide a particular kind of soul to its proper destination. The throne room of the Lord of the Dead transformed with it, no longer just a seat of power, but a cathedral of consequence. Columns of utter darkness held aloft a ceiling that vanished into shadow, while the floor below shimmered with embedded stones of remembrance, each one flickering with glimpses of lives long past. This was where judgment would be given, where mercy would be weighed against justice, and where balance would become law. Around the realm's growing edges, the boundaries hardened. The once porous veil between life and death began to solidify, no longer passable except through sacred passageways. Gates of horn and ivory emerged, separating true dreams from false visions, ensuring that what drifted upward to the sleeping world above served purpose, not chaos. These borders were not meant to isolate, but to organize, preserving the harmony between planes while still allowing the essential threads that wove the cosmos together to remain intact. What had once been an empty tism was now a kingdom. Every river, every guardian, every stone laid with reason. The dead would not arrive at a place of disarray, but into a structure reflecting divine precision. Death was not disorder, it was symmetry in shadow. The realm below now mirrored the order of the heavens above, yet uniquely its own, shaped for eternity. Through this structure, Hades ensured that his dominion would not be an afterthought, but an essential function of the cosmos. Every living soul, no matter how grand or humble, would one day pass through these gates. Their deeds would be measured, their journey continued. But before the system could fulfill its purpose, it awaited its first true pilgrims. As humanity spread across the earth, so too did mortality. Illness, age, and accident began to steal the breath from the living. These earliest dead did not know where to go. No paths had yet been walked, no rituals guided them. Shaped by Prometheus from clay and flame, they hovered at the edge of the living world, confused, lost, adrift between two realms. Some clung near their own corpses, unable to let go. Others wandered, unsure whether they were dreaming or dead. The underworld stood ready, but its gates remained unopened. It was Hermes, the divine messenger, who first saw the problem. Watching souls accumulate in the spaces between life and afterlife, he approached his uncle Hades with a proposition. If he, who traveled between Olympus and Earth, could also guide the dead, perhaps chaos could be prevented. So began the role of Hermes Psychopompos, the soul conductor. His sandals that once delivered messages now traced the routes of the departed. At first, these journeys were difficult. Some spirits resisted the truth of their death. Others rushed forward in panic. Hermes learned to speak gently to some and firmly to others. He became not just a guide, but a comforter, preparing each soul for what lay beyond. With time, patterns formed. Mortals noticed that certain acts seemed to ease a loved one's passing. Words spoken, rituals observed. Trial and error, helped by divine suggestion, gave rise to the earliest customs of death. One stood out, the coin, a small offering placed on the tongue or eyelids of the dead, the obol, became the price of safe passage across the Styx. Charon, ancient ferryman, at first accepted what he was given, but a single, simple coin became the standard, ensuring all could pay their way and the gates would not favor the rich over the poor. Burial too took form, not from sentiment, but from structure. The dead needed rest, and the living needed closure. From ritual came order, and from order, peace. The earliest souls learned through sorrow that without proper burial, their journey could not continue. Suspended between worlds, unable to move forward, yet barred from return, they drifted like unanswered questions on the edge of existence. The earth had to reclaim the body for the cycle to close. From dust we come, and to dust we must return. From this necessity, rituals began to bloom. Mourning customs emerged not from doctrine, but from longing. Libations poured onto the soil formed a liquid bridge between the living and the dead, and funeral games, both celebration and farewell, honored lives now past. Every gesture, placing a coin, washing the body, speaking the name, became a thread connecting the grief of the living with the passage of the soul. Over time and with divine guidance, the journey of the dead took shape, a path of distinct stages, each demanding understanding, each carrying the weight of truth. Death comes in many forms, sometimes like a whisper, a gentle presence placing a hand on the shoulder. Other times it strikes like a storm, sudden and violent. But whether it arrives slowly or all at once, it is not the end. It is the beginning of departure. Separated from flesh, the soul enters a liminal space, neither fully gone nor truly present. Here Hermes appears, not with commands, but with compassion. He waits, he listens, he allows the soul time to release the last lingering attachments to the world above. The journey toward the Styx is never identical. Some souls walk through memories made real. Childhood homes, familiar forests, quiet fields. Others cross symbolic landscapes, mountains formed of regret, rivers fed by sorrow. These paths help each spirit begin the first great task of the dead, to reckon with the meaning of their life. At the water's edge waits Charon. The ferryman does not judge. His hollow eyes merely ask one question: are you ready? A coin on the tongue placed there by the loving hands of the living pays for passage. Without it, the soul must wait 100 years, a silent exile that reminds the world above how deeply ritual matters. As the boat crosses the Styx, something shifts. Earthly concerns begin to dissolve. Many souls report feeling their burdens fall away, their anger, ambition, fear, all fading as they drift toward the gates. It is not forgetting, it is realignment. At the threshold stands Cerberus, his three heads watching past, present, and possibility. The innocent pass unhindered, but those who carry guilt feel it stir beneath their skin. He does not attack. He does not accuse, but his growl makes the unworthy tremble. Beyond him, the soul enters the court of final truth. There the three judges await, Minos with the logic of law, Rhadamanthus with the iron scale of principle, and Aeacus with the weight of compassion. They do not listen to excuses. They read the soul as it is, stripped of self-deception. For some, judgment is swift, the brave, the cruel, the just, the wicked. But many lives are layered and tangled. In these cases, the judges consult, not as bureaucrats, but as seekers of truth. Every motive is weighed, every consequence measured. From these deliberations, stories emerge. Legends pass back to the world of the living. A soldier who fell defending strangers finds himself in Elysium. A wealthy man who hoarded grain during famine wanders hungry through Tartarus. These tales are not myths. They are messages, warnings, reminders. Justice, once spoken, is final. The word of the judges echoes through eternity. No appeals, no second chances. Only the truth, shining or shadowed, remains. The final judgment of a soul did not merely reflect mortal law, but echoed the deeper rhythms of the cosmos. It was not reward or punishment handed down from above. It was consequence, inevitable and exact. Each soul received not more, not less, but precisely what their life had earned. The path was determined by choice, not chance, and thus every journey came to its destined end, with the soul directed to its eternal dwelling. For most, that destination was the Asphodel Meadows, a place not of torment, but of stillness. These souls had lived lives neither heroic nor hateful, neither exalted in virtue nor drowned in vice. They were the ordinary, the many. Their eternity awaited in fields that stretched like the gray haze of dawn, endless and muted. In this vast neutrality, flowers bloomed without color, without scent. Breezes passed without warmth or chill. The souls wandered, not in agony, but in an absence of vividness. They moved like shadows of memory, sometimes brushing past those they had loved in life, but unable to rekindle that spark. Time did not flow here. It lingered. No seasons marked its passing, no transformation broke its sameness. The fruit of the trees gave nourishment, but no pleasure. The streams wound gently through the meadows, their waters forever lukewarm. A perfect, quiet balance. For some, a peace. For others, a subtle form of despair. Yet this was justice, not punishment, but reflection. In contrast, at the farthest edge of the underworld, light bloomed. Elysium emerged not as a place of escape, but as a fulfillment. It welcomed those whose lives had risen above the common path, souls marked by heroic sacrifice, divine favor, or extraordinary virtue. Here, eternal spring reigned, not just in temperature, but in spirit. The air was scented with ambrosia, and flowers bloomed forever without fading in. Trees bore fruit that ripened but never rotted. Streams ran with nectar. The grass gave way beneath bare feet, yet sprang back untouched. But what made Elysium radiant was not its beauty, it was its purpose. Here, souls did not drift. They thrived. Warriors engaged in glorious battle without blood. Poets composed verses that caught glimpses of divine truth. Athletes competed for honor, not dominance. No one suffered. No one envied. Fulfillment, not perfection, defined this place. Even death could not steal meaning here. What one loved in life, one could continue in death. Unlike other souls, the blessed of Elysium remembered who they had been. They remained connected to the world above, not haunting it, but guiding it. They whispered to their descendants, offering protection, wisdom, and strength. They became ancestral spirits, bridges between the mortal and the eternal. Some chose to remain forever, content in their peace. But others, filled with a higher longing, drank again from the waters of Lethe, not to forget, but to return, to live again, to test their virtue anew. This choice, the option to re-enter the mortal cycle, was what truly set Elysium apart. Not as a reward, but as a frontier, a place not just of ending, but of becoming. Thus the underworld, in its complexity, mirrored the soul. Gray fields for the many, golden light for the few, silence for some, purpose for others, and all according to the law that had no author, only balance. A justice written not in decree but in destiny. While much of the underworld offered acceptance, a reflection of what was earned, received, and remembered, there remained one place that embodied something far more exacting. Tartarus, the pit of punishment. Unlike other realms that offered rest, reward, or resignation, Tartarus offered reckoning. It was not chaos nor cruelty, but a crucible where divine justice sculpted precise consequences for every transgression. The geography itself bent to necessity. When crimes called for unique responses, the landscape obeyed. Jagged cliffs of obsidian formed for those condemned to endless struggle. Lakes of fire simmered into existence for those who had betrayed sacred trust. Wheels of molten bronze spun into being for the proud who had dared to ascend toward divinity. Tartarus was not merely a prison, it was a forge of eternal lessons. Each punishment was crafted to mirror the crime with unnerving precision. Tantalus, once a king, stood waist-deep in water beneath branches heavy with fruit. But when thirst moved him to drink, the water withdrew. When hunger stirred his hand, the fruit lifted out of reach. To crave without satisfaction, forever, that was his sentence. Sisyphus, cunning and clever, learned that intellect could not outwit eternity. Each time he neared the summit with his stone, it rolled back, again and again and again. His punishment was not pain, but futility. The lesson? Defiance of cosmic order leads only to unending repetition. Then came Ixion, whose burning wheel spun endlessly for his offense, trying to seduce the divine queen herself. Bound to its spokes, his body moved in agony, his mind trapped in regret. He became a warning to mistake mortal desire for divine entitlement, is to court eternal disorientation. The Danaids, 50 sisters who murdered their husbands, were condemned to fill a jar that would never fill. Their vessels leaked endlessly, just as their crime had ruptured trust beyond repair. They labored not in agony, but in futility, a sentence not of pain, but of fruitless effort, repeating until understanding replaced arrogance. Each of these punishments did more than sentence the guilty. They told stories, etched warnings into the structure of the cosmos. Divine justice did not only punish, it taught, it mirrored, it warned. Tartarus expanded as needed, each new crime carving a deeper chamber. A hierarchy of suffering formed. The more profound the betrayal, especially of family, of blood, the deeper the descent. Some regions lay so low that even the faint glow of Upper Tartarus could not reach them. And so the underworld grew not just in choice but in moral complexity. Boundaries between its provinces did not resemble walls. Instead, the very fabric of reality shifted between zones. Light dimmed or vanished. Air grew thicker or burned hotter. Even time seemed to change its pace. Rivers played a crucial role in these transitions. Souls moving toward the asphodel, meadows found themselves carried by calming waters that gently dulled the sharp edges of memory. The blessed, bound for Elysium, passed through streams that refreshed rather than erased, awakening a clarity of spirit suited to eternal purpose. But those destined for Tartarus found no such mercy. The rivers reflected their fate. Phlegethon burned without relief, flames licking upward like a preview of what was to come. Cocytus, the river of lamentation, froze the deeper one stepped, its cold intensifying with the weight of the soul's guilt. Even the water resisted their crossing. Amid these regions stood the plain of judgment, a quiet threshold between destinations. Here, souls paused, reflected, and reckoned with what they were leaving behind and where they would now dwell. The hills of remembrance rose nearby, giving souls a final glimpse of the paths before and behind. No soul could wander where it did not belong. Passageways appeared only for those with the right to cross. The order of the dead was not maintained by force, but by the natural law of consequence woven into the world itself. In the great architecture of the underworld, boundaries were sacred. No soul could wander from one realm to another without divine permission. These limitations were not barriers of cruelty, but instruments of order, ensuring that each soul remained in the place their life had earned. But the pathways themselves were not fixed. They shifted, adapted, responded to need. The afterlife became a living map, a dynamic reflection of cosmic justice. Over time, what had begun as a single shadowed realm became a vast tapestry, woven with light, silence, fire, and memory. Every corridor, every gate, every river carried meaning. The kingdom of the dead had found its final form. It was complete, balanced, enduring, and yet, for all its order, it was also profoundly lonely. Unlike his brothers, who ruled with radiant consorts at their sides, the Lord of the Dead sat alone on his throne of obsidian. That solitude, like gravity, pressed down upon his dominion. Above, in the land of sunlight, a young goddess danced through meadows of eternal spring. Persephone, daughter of Demeter, known to the gods as the bringer of destruction. Her laughter echoed through fields of narcissus and crocus, delicate and untouchable. She embodied all that the underworld lacked: life, youth, possibility. And from below, eyes watched her, not with malice, but with longing. In her, the god of death saw a mirror image, a being who stood between worlds, maiden and queen, spring and shadow. With Zeus's silent assent, and without Demeter's knowledge, the plan took form. As Persephone reached for a particularly radiant bloom, the earth beneath her feet cracked open like a mouth drawn by hunger. From its depths rose a chariot of polished ebony, drawn by spectral horses whose hooves struck sparks against the air. For her cry could rise, she was taken, swept into darkness. The descent was both swift and eternal. In seconds that stretched like lifetimes, Persephone passed rivers that ran against the laws of nature, caverns where light had never been born, and figures who moved like memory itself, flickering, uncertain. Her captor said nothing. His silence bore the weight of fate, for this was not mere desire, it was necessity. Above, the harvest goddess felt the loss before any word reached her. Something had torn through the bond, between mother and daughter, and Demeter, immortal though she was, felt the wound as a mortal might, with panic. She began her search immediately. From mountaintops to ocean trenches, she questioned keys and beasts, spirits and shadows. But no one answered. And as her search deepened in desperation, the earth itself began to wither. Fields faded from green to gray. Rivers slowed to reluctant trickles. Animals refused to breed. Trees stood silent, withholding fruit. The world responded to its grieving mother by ceasing to grow. Demeter's radiance dimmed. She neither ate nor drank. For 9 days and nights, she wandered without rest, her light flickering like a dying flame. She turned to Helios, the all-seeing sun, and then to Hecate, goddess of hidden paths. They confirmed what she feared most, that her daughter had been taken. With Zeus's knowledge. With that truth, rage bloomed. Not thunder, not fire, but something deeper. A divine harrow that turned fertile soil to dust. If the gods would not honor a mother's grief, then let none feel the blessing of her harvest. Let mortals starve. Let kings beg. Let the earth itself reflect her barren heart. Famine spread like plague. Fields cracked open. Granaries emptied. Cities that once sang with life began to fall silent. And still the goddess wandered. Temples stood silent, their altars cold, as the fields withered and farmers turned away in despair. Worship faded like breath on winter glass, and with it, the power of the gods began to wane. Even Olympus, distant and divine, could feel the pull of mortal absence. Zeus, king of gods, understood what was at stake. If humanity perished, so too would reverence, and the bond between heaven and earth would collapse. Action had to be taken. He called for Hermes, swift-footed messenger of realms, and gave him a mission: retrieve the maiden from the depths. But even Zeus, mighty though he was, could not overturn the ancient laws. Hermes descended, gliding through familiar paths that threaded between death and divinity. In the court of shadows, he expected to find a grieving captive. Instead, he found a queen in the making. Persephone, no longer just daughter, but ruler, stood with quiet strength. She had eaten the seeds. 3, some said, others claimed 7. The number mattered less than the act itself. The pomegranate, red as spilled blood, bound her to the underworld. No one who tastes the food of the dead may return unchanged. Yet the world above could not endure without Demeter's blessing. And so compromise was forged from necessity. Persephone would divide her existence between realms, part of each year in the world of light, part beside her dark husband in the kingdom below. Some myths speak of equal seasons, others of 2/3 and 1/3. But what mattered most was the rhythm that emerged, a sacred cycle. When Persephone rose, so did the earth. Flowers returned. Birds sang. Wheat swelled in golden fields. Joy stirred in the bones of creation. And when she descended again, silence crept in. Leaves fell. Animals grew still. The world drew inward to mourn her absence. From this sacred movement came the seasons, not merely of weather, but of spirit. Yet something more profound began to unfold. Persephone was no longer the innocent girl who picked flowers. She had changed, grown. She became dual in nature, goddess of spring and sovereign of endings. Her presence reshaped the underworld itself. The gray monotony of the asphodel meadows softened with new hues of memory. In Elysium, new gardens bloomed, places where the blessed could tend eternal flowers, fragrant with their own stories. Even Tartarus, the place of torment, bent to her presence. When she walked its corridors, the flames dimmed, just briefly, allowing rest between punishments. Her influence did not weaken the realm, it deepened it. For the living, Persephone became something rare, an intercessor between worlds. Mothers who lost children called her name in whispered prayers. Grieving souls found her more merciful than her silent husband. During liminal hours, when night meets dawn or dusk meets dark, she was known to grant glimpses, messages, even reunions. Her marriage, far from a myth of abduction, became a myth of balance. Through her, life and death were woven together. Fertility itself became tinged with finality. Every new leaf bore the shadow of its fall. Every heartbeat ticked towards stillness. But likewise, every death now carried the seed of return. The cosmic dance no longer spiraled aimlessly. It moved in circles, bound to her rhythm. Her throne, carved from crystal that caught and held hidden light, stood beside her husband's seat of obsidian. Together they ruled the sanctum of endings. She, radiant with the memory of life. He, grave with the knowledge of its close. Their court was not one of terror, but of truth, the most complete expression of duality in existence. And so the underworld, once ruled by one, now had two. But more than that, it gained a bridge. Through Persephone, the veil between life and death became not a wall, but a doorway, one that swung softly in rhythm with the turning of the earth. Through her, the living and the dead remained forever linked. The world above found its meaning in the rhythm she helped weave, a rhythm where birth and death, joy and sorrow, growth and decay, it all folded into one continuous cycle. With Persephone's reign, the cosmos had achieved a wholeness it had once lacked. Even death itself had been absorbed into the choreography of renewal. But the balance of order does not mean stillness. Boundaries, though divinely drawn, were never immune to challenge. Across time, there were those few who dared cross the veil, heroes, lovers, mourners, mortals who sought to touch what lies beyond. Each breach became a legend, echoing through both realms. Chief among these was Heracles, son of Zeus. When King Eurystheus pronounced the final of his 12 labors, to bring Cerberus from the underworld to the land of the living, even the boldest of men faltered. No mortal had ever wrested victory from death's own guardian. But Heracles did not charge forward as he once had in earlier feats. For this descent, he bore no sword, no shield, only the lion's skin draped over his shoulders, a divine relic of both protection and humility. This time he did not arrive in rage, but in reverence. Athena and Hermes descended with him. Their presence parted shadows and silenced snarls. In their company, Heracles saw clearly the contours of the realm, the difference between the punished and the penitent, the wanderers and the contented. Knowledge became his weapon, and with it, he advanced. At last, he stood before Cerberus, the triple-headed sentinel, eyes like eclipses, tail like a coiled serpent of time. But Heracles offered no threat, only a request. He bowed as one warrior to another, seeking trial rather than conquest. The Lord of the Dead, intrigued, accepted, but with one condition. The hero must subdue the beast using no weapon, no charm, only his own mortal strength. What followed was not merely a battle, but a rite. Cerberus lunged, teeth bared, head striking like hammers, tail snapping like divine thunder. Heracles met each move with calculated resolve. He gripped sinew and scale, resisted venom and roar. Slowly, as eternity stretched, the hound relented, not out of defeat, but recognition. Heracles had proven his worth. But wisdom walked beside strength. The hero knew victory meant little without restoration. He returned Cerberus to his sacred threshold, honoring the balance that must not be broken. Where strength pressed through the gates of death, music whispered its way inward. Orpheus, son of Calliope, muse of epic song, descended not with might, but with melody. His lyre strummed harmonies that bent even the chill of death. His love for Eurydice, cut short by a serpent's bite on their wedding day, drew him into the depths. But he did not seek revenge. He sought reunion. No coin passed from hand to ferryman. Charon rode in rhythm to grief's lullaby. Cerberus slept under notes of mourning. Orpheus reached the throne of shadows, where Hades and Persephone listened not to words, but to what lay beneath them. His music sang of devotion deeper than time, of longing more powerful than decay. For a moment even death paused. The Lord and Queen of the underworld, moved by the purity of the offering, granted what no soul had been given before. Eurydice might return to the land of the living. But only if Orpheus led her out without once looking back. The path stretched upward, silence wrapped them. Footsteps echoed, but fear travels faster than reason. At the very edge of light, Orpheus turned. Eurydice vanished, lost a second time, not by death's cruelty, but by love's doubt. And so his legend became caution and comfort both, that the gates of death may open, but never without cost. These stories of descent and return remind us that the underworld is not a prison, but a mirror. It reflects the heart of the one who enters. Courage may win entry, art may win mercy, but neither may escape the truth that awaits all souls. The path may be walked, but it must be earned. And above all, the cycle continues, uninterrupted. The notes carried memories of laughter shared, futures imagined, happiness denied by the cruel indifference of fate. For the first time in uncounted ages, divine tears shimmered in immortal eyes. Even the Lord of the Dead, carved from obsidian resolve, found himself stirred by mortal grief. Beside him stood Persephone, fresh from the bloom of the world above. Her voice, gentle but firm, joined Orpheus's plea. In his love, she recognized her own, a daughter's devotion to her mother, a queen's aching memory of sunlight. With her urging and the purity of the song, the impossible was granted. Eurydice would live again. But divine mercy does not arrive without condition. Orpheus must lead the way without ever looking back, not once, until both he and Eurydice stood bathed in the full light of the living sun. Faith must carry him through darkness. Trust must be total. And for a while it was. He climbed, his beloved's footsteps echoing softly behind him. Each turn of the labyrinth brought him closer to rebirth. But as the final rays kissed his face, silence fell too completely. A single thought, a doubt, a fear, crept into his mind. Was she still there? One heartbeat of uncertainty overcame a journey of faith. He turned, and in that instant, the promise unraveled. Eurydice dissolved into shadow. His cry, a sound more sorrowful than any song, reverberated across both realms, reshaping the acoustics of the underworld itself. There would be no second chance. Mercy once given could not be given again. Orpheus returned to the world alone. His music, once full of hope, now dripped with sorrow. His death, torn apart by those who feared the truth his melodies revealed, seemed a final echo of his mistake. Love had moved the ones. Doubt had undone their gift. But not all who descended sought reunion. Some came with arrogance instead of love. Theseus of Athens and Pirithous of Thessaly, warriors, kings, and bound by brotherhood, hatched a plan that reeked of hubris. If they could conquer monsters, why not win divine brides? Their logic warped by pride, they first abducted Helen, daughter of Zeus, to be Theseus's future queen. But Helen was merely the rehearsal. The true ambition lay deeper. Pirithous set his sights on Persephone herself. With absurd confidence, they descended into the underworld, believing tales of their greatness would grant them honor, or at least a hearing. They received neither. The king of death met their arrogance with cold civility. He offered seats, thrones even, but not of gold or ivory. No, the chairs they received were carved of enchantment, the seats of forgetfulness. No sooner had they sat than their bodies began to root into stone, their thoughts draining like spilled water, their memories dissolving grain by grain. They became furniture, monuments to folly. Around them the dead passed in solemn procession. Persephone glided by, radiant, untouchable, her presence a quiet rebuke. Servants laid out feasts they could never taste. Time lost all meaning. Their legendary strength meant nothing here. And so they sat, pride reduced to stillness. When Heracles later descended for his final labor, he found Theseus there, part stone, part man, his eyes dim with half-remembered regret. Heracles stood at the crossroads of divine law and mortal friendship. Using strength augmented by divine heritage, Heracles managed to wrench Theseus free from the enchanted seat, though not without cost. The king of Athens left behind portions of his flesh, eternal scars branding him with the consequences of his arrogance. Pirithous, however, remained fixed, part of the underworld's very architecture, a cautionary statue carved not by stone, but by his own hubris. Future souls would pass the seat and wonder at the man forever bound to it, a silent monument to ambition that overstepped mortal boundaries. Yet where heroes failed through strength or pride, one mortal woman succeeded through humility and love. Psyche, whose beauty incited Venus's jealousy, found herself caught in divine machinations that eventually led to immortality. The goddess of love, unable to tolerate a mortal rival, commanded her son Cupid to orchestrate a cruel punishment. But the plan backfired. Cupid pricked himself with his own arrow and fell deeply in love with Psyche. Their romance unfolded in secrecy. Psyche lived in a palace of dreams, loved by a husband she could never see. But doubt, seeded by jealous sisters, caused her to break the one rule: never gaze upon his face. In doing so, she lost him and the life they shared. In her despair, she sought reconciliation and was sent to Venus herself, who imposed a series of impossible tasks. The final task was the most perilous of all: descend into the underworld, and retrieve a measure of Persephone's beauty. Armed with divine advice and unwavering resolve, Psyche began her descent, not with weapons or bravado, but with quiet readiness. She brought barley cakes to distract Cerberus, coins for Charon's fair, and most importantly, a list of instructions. Do not aid the lame man and his donkey, ignore the drowning hand, and refuse the feast presented by Persephone's handmaidens. Each challenge tested her resolve. Compassion could be her downfall. Discipline was her salvation. Before the queen of the underworld, Psyche's humility shone brighter than any weapon. Persephone, seeing in the mortal girl a reflection of her own duality, granted her the box of divine beauty. The journey back held one final test. Psyche was warned not to open the container. But curiosity, the same impulse that once cost her Cupid's love, struck again. Within the box was not beauty, but Stygian sleep, a death-like stupor unfit for mortal minds. Only Cupid's intervention, sanctioned by Zeus himself, saved her. The god of love revived her and petitioned the king of Olympus to grant Psyche immortality. Moved by their love and her proven worth, Zeus consented. Psyche joined the gods, not through conquest, but through surrender and faith. Her tale became a model. That grace, not might, may win favor from the divine. While many ventured into death's realm for selfish aims, others descended in search of wisdom. Odysseus, cursed to wander by Poseidon's wrath, needed guidance that only the dead could offer. His journey took him to the edge of the world, to the borders of Erebus, where night and day meet. There, rather than enter the underworld, he performed ancient rites. Digging a trench with his bronze blade, he poured libations of honey, milk, wine, and barley, then spilled the blood of sacrificial animals. These sacred acts drew forth the dead. The first to appear was Elpenor, a fallen companion who had died unceremoniously on Circe's island. Elpenor's plea was simple: honor the dead. Bury me properly, he begged, lest I wander endlessly. Odysseus promised this final kindness. The ritual continued, and one by one the shades emerged, souls of warriors, prophets, and King each bearing secrets wrapped in sorrow, each offering fragments of the wisdom Odysseus needed. Through reverence and ritual, rather than conquest, he obtained the insight that would lead him home. In this, too, the underworld revealed its truth, that death was not just punishment, nor merely passage, but a source of meaning, one that spoke only to those who listened with reverence. This encounter immediately taught Odysseus the sacred importance of proper burial. Even in death's shadowed dominion, codes of honor and respect prevailed. He vowed to grant Elpenor the rights he deserved, affirming that obligations between the living and dead endure across the cosmic veil. Then appeared Anticlea, his mother. Her ghost confessed that grief over his absence had hastened her own end, a revelation that struck the hero with guilt. Only by drinking the blood did her spirit take enough substance to speak clearly, a reminder that even in death, connection demands sacrifice. Next came Agamemnon, his tale a dire warning. Murdered by his wife upon returning home from Troy, the fallen king urged caution, teaching Odysseus to suspect betrayal even where love once lived. Then Achilles emerged, and his words shocked the war-weary traveler. The mighty warrior, once the envy of every Greek, now declared that he would rather serve as a slave among the living than reign over the dead. The lesson rang clear: glory fades, life endures. Blind in life and in death, the prophet Tiresias saw farther than any. He revealed the perils ahead: Ephtrain, Sirens, Scylla, and Charybdis, the sacred cattle of Helios, and prophesied that even after reaching Ithaca, Odysseus must journey further to appease Poseidon's wrath. The underworld demanded not just passage, but understanding. Last came Ajax the Lesser, still bitter over their contest for Achilles' armor. Though Odysseus pleaded for peace, Ajax turned away. Death, it seemed, did not dissolve all earthly grievances. Some souls clung to resentment as fiercely as to memory. As more shades approached, drawn by sacrificial blood, Odysseus felt the limits of human comprehension. Some truths, he realized, must wait until death itself. He fled back to his ship, bearing the weight of wisdom and sorrow alike. But among all mortal descents, none carried greater cosmic purpose than Aeneas' journey. The Trojan hero, guided by the Cumaean Sibyl through the hidden entrance at Lake Avernus, sought not personal triumph but prophetic vision. His mission was not only to honor his past, but to shape Rome's future. Unlike other heroes, Aeneas was required to first obtain the Golden Bough, a mystical token sacred to Diana and the key to the Underworld's gate. This divine artifact symbolized rightful entry, showing that destiny, not ambition, grants permission to cross death's threshold. The Sibyl led him through regions few had witnessed. He saw infants whose lives ended before they began, innocents awaiting justice, and lovers who perished for devotion. Each zone reflected moral intricacies rather than blunt punishment or reward. The field of mourning struck him hardest. There he encountered Dido, the queen he had abandoned for duty. She refused his apology, turning away in pain to rejoin her first husband. Even destiny, it seemed, could not absolve certain wounds. But solace came in Elysium. Among the groves of eternal light, Aeneas reunited with his father Anchises. Their meeting blended private joy with public revelation. Anchises unveiled the truth of the soul's journey, that each spirit undergoes cycles of cleansing and reincarnation. In luminous vision, he pointed out Rome's future champions, Romulus, Caesar, Augustus, names destined to shape history. Through these revelations, the Roman soul adopted a new philosophy. The underworld was not merely a place of endings, but of transformations. Rebirth followed purification. Wisdom grew across lifetimes. This belief fused with older Greek traditions, influencing Roman religion and later philosophical thought from Stoicism to Neoplatonism. The way out bore meaning too. As Aeneas approached the twin gates of sleep, one of horn through which truth passed, and one of ivory through which illusions rose, he was sent back through the ivory gate. Scholars would debate this for centuries. Did it mean what he saw was dream, metaphor, or divine message shrouded in mystery? In any case, his descent marked a turning point, a hero witnessing the total architecture of fate and returning not only with knowledge, but with mandate. The underworld, once seen as place of finality, now became a crucible for rebirth, destiny, and national purpose. Through Odysseus and Aeneas, ancient myth wove a deeper pattern, where mortality and eternity met in shadow, and where meaning emerged from mystery. While others had struggled to return through the same paths they entered, Aeneas emerged through the gate of ivory, the portal of false dreams. This puzzling choice has long invited interpretation. Perhaps it suggested that even the truest prophecy remains entangled with uncertainty, that visions of destiny demand human action to shape them into reality. His ascent to the world above was not merely a return, it was a transformation. Aeneas was no longer a refugee leader, but the ordained founder of a civilization. What he had witnessed in the underworld had reframed his personal losses, revealing them as necessary sacrifices in service of a greater order. The fall of Troy was not the end, but the prelude to Rome. Through that acceptance, he gained the strength to shape an empire. Thus, these heroic descents into the underworld became more than legend. They set a precedent. Death's domain, though forbidden, could be approached under divine sanction and sacred purpose. Each journey etched itself into myth, altering both the structure of the underworld and the understanding of the world above. These narratives taught that the journey to death could offer life's most profound insights, that reverence, not force, opened the gates below. Over time, mortal comprehension of the underworld grew. The domain of death expanded beyond a bleak terminus into a dynamic cosmos of moral, emotional, and spiritual depth. New divine presences emerged, each taking up a unique station within this evolving realm. These deities reflected death's complexity and mirrored the expanding horizons of Greek theological thought. Among the most significant was Hecate, goddess of crossroads, witchcraft, and liminal spaces. Unlike deities bound to specific zones, she moved freely between the realms of sky, earth, and underworld. Her torches lit paths through darkness, literal and symbolic, and her wisdom guided those who dared to seek forbidden knowledge. The crossroads she governed were not just locations, but pivotal moments, where mortal and immortal fates intertwined. Hecate's role extended to necromancers, midwives, and travelers between realms, figures who, like her, operated between beginnings and endings. Her rites brought a new structure to human interaction with the dead. The tradition of leaving offerings, garlic, honey cakes, fish, and eggs, at triple crossroads during the dark moon became a sacred meal of communion. These rituals allowed for sustained, intentional contact with spirits, creating a continuity that earlier eras had never conceived. Where Hecate illuminated, another presence emerged from deeper shadow. Melinoe, born from the darker face of Persephone's dual nature, took form as both terror and truth. She was the embodiment of the nightmare, appearing when unacknowledged guilt clung to the living like a second skin. Legends described her as half black, half white, a figure lit by moonlight yet steeped in the void. She moved primarily in the mortal world, haunting those whose wrongs had escaped justice. Melinoe's visits were not punishments, but revelations. Her presence could drive murderers to confession or rulers to madness, their crimes exposed by dreams too vivid to ignore. Some traditions claim she was conceived in secret when Zeus, in one of his transformations, assumed the shape of Hades. This parentage made her a paradox, born of light's deception and death's truth. Melinoe became a walking embodiment of unspoken justice. Not all who saw her were wicked, but all had something unresolved. In this way, she extended the authority of the underworld into the waking world, a divine answer to the failings of human law. Where earthly courts faltered, her haunting presence compelled truth. She reminded mortals that death's reach was not confined to the grave, that even the deepest secrets would one day rise to the surface. Through these evolving figures and their growing influence, the realm of death became a mirror of mortal life, not static but responsive, layered, and infinitely reflective. Each new deity, each new myth, added another dimension to the architecture of the afterlife. The journey below was no longer just about endings, but about balance, confrontation, and eventual clarity. The Moirai, Clotho, Lachesis, and Atropos retained their ancient power, yet their presence deepened within the architecture of death's realm. These fates, who spun, measured, and cut the thread of mortal life, remained untouched by the rule of Olympians or the authority of the underworld sovereign. Even Hades deferred to their judgment, for they answered only to the primordial order itself. Time bent around them. In their distant cavern at the world's edge, they perceived all existence simultaneously, past, present, and future, as overlapping truths. Each soul that arrived at the gates of the underworld carried a fate already woven into the fabric of the cosmos. This destiny, however, did not invalidate judgment. It ensured that the final destination would resonate with the soul's nature, as preordained by the loom of existence. The Moirai's instruments became icons in myth. Clotho's spindle drew the raw essence of potential from the unmanifested. Lachesis's rod determined not only a life's duration, but its essential character. And Atropos wielded shears forged from matter unknown to gods or mortals, capable of severing even the strongest, most enchanted threads. Another primordial figure, Nyx, continued to hold sway in the deep. Mother of Hypnos and Thanatos, this goddess of night stood as a liminal force, older than Olympians, born before light. She existed at the periphery of Death's kingdom, in palaces formed from shadow and stars, simultaneously located at the edge of Hades, beyond the Garden of Atlas, and scattered along the midnight skies. She could pass through veils even gods could not pierce, and her wisdom influenced decisions when cosmic law conflicted with momentary justice. Occasionally, she offered counsel to the Lord of the Dead, guiding him through moral dilemmas older than the throne he sat upon. As time passed and the mythology of the underworld matured, more minor figures emerged. Though less known than Hades or Persephone, they added complexity and richness to the realm. Their tales often began above and resolved below, illustrating that death was not just an end, but part of the wider continuity. One such tale belonged to Alcestis. When Thanatos arrived for King Admetus, it was Alcestis, his devoted wife, who volunteered to die in his place. This was not defiance or evasion, but an act of sacrificial love. Her descent challenged the very order of the afterlife. Guardians paused, uncertain how to receive one who embraced death willingly. Alcestis's journey shifted protocol. Where others came reluctantly, she arrived with solemn purpose. Her later rescue by Heracles added another layer. During one of his labors, the hero encountered her spirit and physically wrestled with death to bring her back. This moment, rare and extraordinary, showed that even Thanatos could be bested when divine will aligned with human virtue. Alcestis became a living symbol of redemptive sacrifice, one who had touched death and returned, altered but whole. Not all souls carried such grace. Ajax the Lesser, famed for his prowess in Troy, suffered a fate dictated by arrogance. His crime was spiritual, not tactical, violating Cassandra within Athena's sanctuary. Though he escaped immediate punishment, his actions offended divine law. On his journey home, storms, stirred by Athena, shattered his fleet. Yet even shipwreck did not humble him. He boasted survival despite divine wrath, declaring his strength superior to fate itself. That pride sealed his doom. Poseidon, at the god's request, split the very rock Ajax clung to. He drowned not in water, but in hubris. In death, his soul remained unrepentant. Unlike others who accepted judgment, Ajax refused integration into any domain, neither Asphodel, nor Tartarus, nor Elysium. He haunted the borders, a shade between realms. His wandering ghost became a living reminder. Divine law may wait, but it never forgets. His pride echoed endlessly, a lesson for mortals and gods alike. The tale of Alcestis showed the power of selfless love. The tale of Ajax showed the cost of sacrilegious arrogance. Both found resolution in the underworld, revealing that death's domain was not only a place of endings, but of consequence. In its depths, myths became judgments, and memory turned into eternal structure. These souls and stories wove themselves into the ever-growing mosaic of the afterlife, a realm both shaped by and shaping the mortal world. His example revealed that the core of one's personality could endure even after the dissolution of the physical body. This truth echoed in the story of Minthe, a water nymph whose transformation became another enduring legend within the underworld. She dwelled near the river Cocytus and attracted the attention of the underworld's dark king long before his union with Persephone. Their association symbolized early connections between death's dominion and the natural forces of the living world. When Persephone later ascended as queen, she discovered traces of the king's former affection. Divine jealousy flared. Some versions credit Demeter with the punishment. Others claim Persephone herself exacted vengeance. Regardless of the agent, the outcome remained constant. Minthe was transformed into the aromatic herb that bore her name. The mint plant's role acquired layered meanings. Its pungent scent became associated with masking the odor of decay, thus tying it eternally to death's presence. It served as a stimulant in rituals involving descent, helping to keep mortal minds alert within darkened spaces. Its resilience, growing even in barren soil, embodied nature's power to thrive near the threshold of the afterlife. The eventual second arrival of Orpheus in the underworld carried a different emotional weight than his first. After years of wandering as a broken poet, scorned and ultimately torn apart by frenzied Maenads during a Dionysian rite, his shade arrived fragmented yet faded. Unlike his earlier descent, Orpheus no longer stood as a living supplicant before the throne of judgment. His torn spirit was received into the Elysian fields, his past sorrows and divine lineage granting him a place among the honored dead. His lyre continued to weave melodies throughout paradise, though reunion with Eurydice proved elusive. She too had evolved, time and spiritual passage changing her in ways that even his music could no longer wholly bridge. These subsidiary stories, Alcestis offering love against death, Ajax persisting in posthumous pride, Minthe transformed into a living threshold, Orpheus completing the arc from artist to spirit, wove richer patterns into the underworld's evolving mythology. Each tale highlighted how personal tragedy, divine will, and the cosmic order interacted across realms. As the underworld matured, the roles of its original inhabitants also deepened. The realm's complexity demanded specialization. Gods and spirits, once tasked with singular functions, evolved to match the increasingly nuanced relationship between the living and the dead. The Erinyes, once singularly focused on vengeance, transformed into agents of purification. Though still ruthless in their pursuit of unpunished guilt, they began to incorporate paths to redemption into their punishments. Caverns once reserved for torment became classrooms for spiritual reckoning. Their methods expanded. Souls who demonstrated understanding and remorse faced lesser trials, while the unrepentant endured punishments tailored to their inner resistance. The Erinyes began coordinating with the judges of the dead to craft individualized purification programs, especially in cases of familial murder. Even the ferryman Charon saw his role evolve. Initially a transporter across the Styx, his long exposure to countless souls refined his abilities. He developed a sense for the spiritual states of arrivals. His boat gained a mystical sensitivity. It glided effortlessly for the just and rocked perilously for the corrupt. Charon's silence, once unbroken, occasionally gave way to counsel. He offered cryptic guidance to the newly dead, preparing them mentally for the judgment ahead. The crossing itself became a rite of psychological transition, and Charon emerged as the first true guide for many on their posthumous journey. He helped shift perception from the idea of death as annihilation to death as movement into a different kind of truth. Even Cerberus, long depicted as a brute enforcer, grew in character. His three heads, once thought to serve identical purposes, each developed distinct personalities. One retained the original role of gatekeeper, ferocious and unmoving. Another evolved to become a comforter to confused or frightened souls, offering reassurance as they approached judgment. The third adopted a role of divine discernment, sensitive to lies, guilt, or concealed virtue. Together, the heads ensured that the dead were received not only with force, but with recognition. These transformations revealed that the realm of death was not static. It responded to shifts in mortal consciousness and divine purpose. Its figures adapted, deepening in wisdom, changing in function, and always reflecting the ever-unfolding interplay between human meaning and cosmic justice. One head of Cerberus recognized legitimate passages, another detected unauthorized entries, and the third sensed those souls who sought escape from their assigned realms. This specialization elevated him beyond the role of mere guardian. He became a complex filter aligned with divine law, maintaining the correct flow of spirits between realms. His bark developed tonal variations to match these functions. Those arriving with proper escort heard only a low, reverberating growl, a sound not of threat, but of recognition. Living heroes attempting unauthorized entry, however, were met with the full power of his thunderous roar, a sonic barrier that conveyed cosmic boundaries. Cerberus's mere presence educated arrivals, reminding them that Death's kingdom functioned not on whim, but by ancient, structured codes. Persephone's role, too, deepened. No longer limited to governing seasonal transitions, she emerged as a subtle advocate for select souls. Her own violent abduction from the upper world endowed her with profound empathy, especially for those who met unjust or premature deaths. Over time, her chambers became spaces for intercession. Mothers who died during childbirth, those who had sacrificed themselves to save others, or children taken too soon often found in her a voice of compassion during judgment. While she never overturned divine justice, her influence introduced a dimension of mercy, softening, never subverting, the cosmic order. Her presence ensured that empathy had a place alongside law. The king of the underworld himself evolved beyond the image of unyielding finality. He became judge, administrator, and custodian of cosmic equilibrium. His rulings now reflected not only the need for accountability, but also an appreciation of life's complexity. Endings under his stewardship were no longer arbitrary or premature. His court transformed into a place of deliberation. Nuanced cases received attention, with considerations given to circumstance, motive, and consequence. The judgments grew to reflect a divine understanding that mortal life offered no absolute clarity, only woven strands of hope, fear, choice, and constraint. Together, the divine pair presided over a domain where justice coexisted with understanding and punishment with potential redemption. Death became a sacred mechanism through which life found its fullest expression. The underworld matured into a place not only of final judgment, but of sacred insight. It birthed theological interpretations that framed death as revelation, a moment where the essence of living could finally be understood. From this evolved mystery traditions, spiritual paths that promise glimpses of death's nature to the living. Through ritual, myth, and transformative experience, these traditions offered not only hope of a better afterlife, but a reorientation of earthly existence itself. Among these, the Eleusinian mysteries stood supreme. Held in Eleusis, northwest of Athens, these rites crystallized the myth of Persephone's descent into a living tradition. Celebrated for nearly 2 millennia, They drew both kings and commoners seeking intimate knowledge of divine truth. The lesser mysteries, observed each spring, marked the first step. In the month of Anthesterion, initiates cleanse themselves in sacred rivers and sacrifice piglets, symbolic stand-ins for themselves. They learned foundational myths that prepared their minds and spirits for the more profound rituals to come. These purifications were not mere pageantry, they were internal alignments, ensuring participants approached the greater mysteries with proper humility. The pilgrimage to Eleusis itself followed a sacred path. Participants reenacted Demeter's wandering search for her daughter, stopping at shrines to perform rituals mirroring her mythic grief and resolve. The journey became a meditation on loss, longing, and eventual reunion, a physical and spiritual rehearsal of cosmic truth. At the Telesterion, the great hall of initiation, the central drama unfolded. Bound by oaths of secrecy, initiates never revealed the full details. Yet through ancient fragments and literary allusions, scholars have partially reconstructed the sacred experience. At the core stood a ritual reenactment of Persephone's abduction, descent, return, and elevation as queen. The performance was more than narrative. It was meant to evoke direct encounter. Through visual spectacle, symbolic objects, sacred utterance, and perhaps even trance, initiates confronted death's mystery firsthand, not as theoretical doctrine, but lived encounter. The goal was transformation. Those who emerged from the Telesterion often spoke of no longer fearing death. They had seen beyond its veil and returned changed. Life itself became more precious, more purposeful. Thus the realm of the dead gave birth to mysteries that changed the living. The underworld's sacred complexity echoed through philosophy, ritual, and the soul of Greek civilization. Death had become not merely a conclusion, but the lens through which life found sacred focus. Initiates witnessed symbolic reenactments of descent, separation, searching, and reunion, rituals that carried significance far beyond their narrative surface. The climactic moment involved a sacred unveiling known as the Things Shown, the Deiknomena. This visual revelation likely featured sacred objects presented under dramatic lighting, perhaps imitations of what Persephone encountered in the underworld, or abstract symbols of transformation and transition. This experience transcended observation. It was a participatory encounter with divine reality, crafted to transform not just understanding, but worldview. Reports from antiquity consistently speak of a profound peace overtaking those who completed the rites. The fear of death dissipated. Life gained a deeper trajectory. Mortality, once seen as termination, now appeared as transformation. Seed becoming harvest, decay giving rise to renewal. In this way, Eleusinian initiates began to perceive death through the agricultural cycle. Winter's dissolution preceding spring's return, decay as precursor to rebirth. While these mysteries offered group experiences through seasonal rites, the Orphic tradition focused on the individual path to spiritual enlightenment. Inspired by Orpheus, the legendary poet who ventured into the underworld seeking his lost love, this spiritual school presented a deeply personal cosmology centered on the soul's divine potential. At the heart of Orphic teaching was humanity's dual nature. According to their myth, mortals were born from the ashes of the Titans, who had devoured Dionysus, mingled with the divine spark of the god himself. This hybrid origin explained human capacity for both barbarity and transcendence. The soul, caught between these inheritances, was seen as a divine fragment trapped in material form, seeking its way back to unity with the source. Orphic cosmology expanded traditional Greek thought with its cyclical view of soul evolution. Souls descended from divine realms into human bodies, gathered experiences through repeated lives, underwent purifications between incarnations in the underworld, and slowly refined themselves toward final liberation. This journey was not passive. It demanded active effort, ascetic practice, ritual purity, and philosophical insight. Orphic initiates embraced distinctive disciplines. They wore white garments, symbolizing spiritual clarity. They avoided certain foods, especially meat and beans, believing that such substances interfered with the soul's purity and its vegetative origins. Certain burial customs were also shunned, as traditional rites could entangle the soul in material recurrence. Sacred texts, Orphic hymns and verses, served not only as prayers, but as spiritual technologies, ritualized sound, myth, and meaning designed to transform consciousness. Some initiates were buried with golden tablets inscribed with precise instructions for navigating the afterlife, which rivers to avoid, what passwords to speak to guardians, how to declare one's divine heritage. These were not symbolic alone. They were practical guides. Unlike the Eleusinian experience, with its communal and cyclical structure, Orphism emphasized solitary practice, ascesis, a disciplined inner journey of mythic meditation, ethical cultivation, and detachment from worldly illusions. The Orphic practitioner became a pilgrim of death in life, training for the final passage as one would for a sacred voyage. Among the inheritors of this path was Pythagoras. His school synthesized Orphic mysticism with mathematical structure, producing one of the most enduring spiritual frameworks in antiquity. Where Orphism stressed divine experience, Pythagoreanism introduced numerical order to the cosmos. The universe was harmony, and the soul moved through it by law. In this view, the afterlife itself was a geometric structure. Paths between realms followed sacred proportions. Justice was rendered not only ethically, but mathematically. The weight of one's soul, the karmic mass in modern terms, was the sum of one's actions, choices, and inner balance. Each soul passed through harmonically arranged planes, progressing toward unity as it shed discord. Transmigration was not random. It followed law. Pythagoreans believed the soul's next life was determined by precise moral calculations, a spiritual equation unfolding over lifetimes. The underworld was not a prison. It was a cosmic correctional system, balancing equations through purgation and recalibration. Purification in this sense resembled spiritual algebra. Ethical errors carried weight, demanding proportional remedy. The Pythagorean community practiced a lifestyle to support this balance. Communal living, silence, music, astronomy, and number theory, all seen as tools for aligning the soul with the harmonies of the universe. Music was not entertainment, it was soul medicine. Mathematics was not calculation, it was the architecture of eternity. Together, the Orphic and Pythagorean traditions offered profound alternatives to traditional views of death. Where others saw fear and finality, they found paths of ascent and liberation. They taught that death was not to be feared but prepared for, not an end, but a turning toward light, toward unity, toward the divine. The Pythagoreans believed that understanding cosmic harmony prepared the soul for the greater harmony it would encounter after death. Even the famous theorem attributed to Pythagoras was more than a geometric truth. It symbolized metaphysical balance. The proportions between the sides of a triangle mirrored the soul's relation to the universe, order, alignment, and unity with the divine. As this philosophical vision deepened, another need emerged, the desire to speak with the dead. This longing led to the development of necromantic oracles, sacred sites where the boundary between worlds thinned, allowing for controlled interaction with the departed. Chief among these was the famed oracle of the dead at Acheron in Thesprotia, where three mythic rivers, Acheron, woe, Periphlegython, blazing fire, and Cocytus, lamentation, converged. Pilgrims arrived not casually but through ritual discipline. They fasted for days, isolated themselves from others, and underwent ceremonial purification. When spiritually and physically prepared, they descended into a labyrinthine network of caverns, each twist and narrow corridor meant to simulate the descent into the underworld itself. The architecture heightened the experience. Sudden drops in elevation created disorientation. Stone walls reflected and distorted sound, turning whispers into ghostly echoes. Pools of water caught firelight in ways that mimicked the flickering forms of spirits. The very design aimed to pull the pilgrim into a liminal state, partway between the living and the dead. At the heart of the ritual was the audience with the departed. Offerings had to be precise and appropriate. Wine for suicides, honey for slain children, blood for fallen warriors. Incantations were spoken word for word, learned from trained oracle priests. The questions had to be exact, the tone reverent. A misstep in wording or offering could anger the spirits or yield silence. Priests served as intermediaries, helping distinguish true spiritual messages from the illusions of fear or suggestion. These oracles reflected a maturing vision of the underworld, not as a sealed tomb, but a permeable place when approached with the right knowledge, reverence, and preparation. Unlike the earlier heroic myths, which portrayed underworld access as limited to the exceptional, mystery traditions democratized the possibility of contact with death's realm. By the classical period, initiates from various mystery schools often synthesized teachings. Eleusinian ritual, Orphic theology, and Pythagorean mathematics could coexist in one spiritual worldview. Greek religion's flexible, non-dogmatic structure allowed for personal integration of diverse mystical systems. This accumulation of wisdom traditions reshaped public understanding of death. No longer was the afterlife a final judgment imposed by fate alone. With the proper rituals, moral development, and esoteric preparation, souls could participate actively in their posthumous journeys. The underworld was no longer merely a prison of consequences. It became a school of the soul. This shift amounted to a quiet revolution in Greek spirituality. What had once been accessible only to demigods or mythic heroes became attainable for any mortal willing to undergo transformation. Sacred secrets, once the domain of gods and exceptional figures, could now be glimpsed through ritual, vision, and disciplined thought. Yet mystery traditions preserved their core mystery. Despite formalization, they never fully surrendered their secrets to language. Initiates insisted that the deepest truths about death and the afterlife could not be spoken, only experienced. Ritual enacted what philosophy could only hint at. Transformation remained the goal, direct encounter with cosmic order through death's veil. In this way, the mysteries taught that death was more than transition. It was education. More than justice, it was evolution. The king of the underworld no longer ruled only over shadows and silence. He presided over a realm of personal growth, where souls could discover truths inaccessible in mortal life. Mystery traditions ensured that death, when it arrived, would not find the soul unprepared. These teachings offered more than hope. They gave tools for facing the inevitable with wisdom, reverence, and clarity. The rituals taught how to live by teaching how to die. As initiatory religions brought experiential understanding, philosophers followed, refining myth into theology and story into ethical systems. The mythology of death began to serve as the foundation for reasoned inquiry, philosophy that sought not only to explain the afterlife, but to guide life itself. Philosophers began to ask a daring question. What if the afterlife didn't simply reflect divine whim, but operated through a rational cosmic justice? Early Greek epics, especially Homer's, portrayed a bleak view of death's realm. In the Odyssey, the underworld was a place of diminished existence. The dead were shades, conscious but powerless, lacking vitality or purpose. Achilles' lament to Odysseus remains one of the most famous lines in ancient literature. He would rather serve as a poor farmhand among the living than reign over all the dead. This worldview saw death not as reward or punishment, but as ultimate separation from life's richness. All souls wandered the same as asphodel fields, regardless of their earthly deeds. The only distinction came from burial rites. Those denied proper ceremony remained trapped between worlds, unable to cross fully into shadow. Yet even those who received full honors found little purpose below. Glory, kleos, became the only defense against oblivion. Heroes strove for lasting fame, deeds remembered by the living, because the underworld itself offered no meaningful afterlife. Homer's influence endured precisely because of this brutal honesty. His vision confronted death as it felt, unjust, final, and leveling. Even kings became whispers. Even warriors faded. This stark vision prompted both religious responses and philosophical revolutions. Plato offered one of the most profound transformations of the underworld myth. In the Republic, he presented a cosmic justice system infused with ethical logic. Souls didn't simply arrive at fixed destinations. They chose future lives based on wisdom acquired through experience. Plato envisioned a metaphysical realm governed by mathematical harmony. Souls moved along the spindle of necessity, guided by the music of the fates, who set the rhythm of the cosmos. Judgments considered not just past actions, but capacity for improvement. Souls underwent cycles of purification, experiencing both pain and pleasure proportional to the weight of their moral choices. For Plato, the underworld became a vast educational process. Death was not the end, but an intermission, time for refinement, for realignment with the good. Some souls returned to life swiftly, nearly perfect. Others endured deeper cleansing. Architecture responded to the needs of the soul, no fixed chambers of reward or torture, but evolving environments of ethical consequence. This redefined both funeral customs and mourning practices. Plato taught that rites should not focus on appeasement, but on helping souls continue their learning. Death marked a passage between classrooms of existence, not a courtroom's verdict, but a new syllabus. The Stoics approached death from another angle: cosmic unity. To them, death was not judgment or transformation, but return. Each soul, a spark of the divine logos, would dissolve back into the universal order. No punishment, no reward, no torment or bliss, only reintegration. Marcus Aurelius, Stoic emperor and philosopher, captured it simply. You came into this world as a part, and you will depart as part. Death was a change of elements, as natural as the seasons. As winter follows autumn, dissolution follows breath. This view stripped death of its drama. The underworld ceased to be a literal realm. There were no gates, no rivers, no thrones, just a return to essence. The fear of punishment faded. So did the hope for paradise. What remained was calm acceptance. The Stoic afterlife did not collapse because it lacked imagination, but because it viewed the cosmos itself as just. If divine reason permeated all, then even death followed principles worthy of trust. Fear became irrational, worry unnecessary. The wise prepared not for judgment, but for release. In contrast to mystical paths that sought transformation through ritual, the Stoics aimed for equanimity through logic. Their vision was austere, but not unkind. It offered peace, if not comfort, by insisting that the universe itself was good and that returning to it was no loss. Together, Homer, Plato, and the Stoics outlined the spectrum of Greek afterlife thought, from shadowy despair to transformative justice to rational dissolution. Each model reflected evolving human needs. Homer honored the hero's legacy. Plato inspired the seeker of wisdom. The Stoics consoled the rational mind. The underworld became more than myth. It became metaphor, mirror, and manual for how to live by considering how to die. Just as physical bodies decomposed into earth, water, air, and fire, so too did the soul return to the universal mind. For the Stoics, this reintegration marked not an end, but a completion. Individual consciousness, if it lingered at all, did so only briefly before merging with the eternal order from which it had come. There was no reward, no punishment, only a natural return. This process dissolved the need for fear or hope about what came after. Instead, Stoic ethics drew motivation from duty. Living virtuously aligned a person with the rational cosmos in the here and now. Whether the self survived death was irrelevant. What mattered was fulfilling one's role within the great order of existence. If an underworld existed at all, it functioned by the same principles that governed all things. Stoic thought offered liberation from superstition without sacrificing moral seriousness. Death lost its power to terrify or seduce. It became another aspect of nature, no more or less mysterious than sunrise or rain. Sages prepared for death not through ritual, but through contemplation. Against this abstraction stood the mystery religions, which argued that true transformation came not from logic, but from direct experience. They preserved myth, but insisted on initiation. The Dionysian mysteries in particular emphasized ego death as rehearsal for bodily death. Through ecstatic rites, wine, music, symbolic dismemberment, participants were temporarily stripped of self. This death in life revealed that the soul could survive dissolution of identity. The experience prepared initiates to meet mortality with less fear, even with curiosity. In rites connected to Orpheus, participants symbolically descended into the underworld, experienced death, and were ritually reborn. Myth blurred with personal experience, collapsing the line between story and soul. Initiates came away fundamentally changed. Death was no longer a dark unknown, but a threshold already crossed in symbolic form. The mysteries of Isis, adapted from Egyptian religion, taught similar lessons. Isis's search for her dismembered consort Osiris became a metaphor for the soul's quest to reassemble its divine nature. Destruction, they taught, was not an end, but a stage in a greater cycle of renewal. Death became a passage rather than a punishment. While philosophers debated afterlife topographies, the mysteries insisted that truth required lived experience. Mystics didn't offer arguments. They offered transformation. They didn't theorize. They trained the soul to meet its own ending with eyes open and heart ready. The Greek world held both threads at once, philosophical and mystical, in constant tension and dialogue. Temples for mystery rites rose beside academies for philosophical inquiry. A single person might be both, a priest of mysteries and a student of reason. Plutarch was one such figure, serving as priest at Delphi while also composing rational treatises on the nature of the divine. He believed myth concealed truths accessible to both analysis and revelation. In his view, the underworld was not just story or symbol. It was real, operating through moral laws that reason could investigate, but only experience could truly grasp. This balance wasn't always easy. Philosophers often argued that reason alone was sufficient to understand death's meaning. Mystery traditions countered that the deepest truths transcended logic. They required reverence, surrender, and transformation. Most ordinary Greeks didn't choose between them. They accepted contradiction. They could follow Stoic ethics, study Platonic texts, and still be initiated into the rites of Dionysus or Isis. This plurality of paths didn't weaken Greek engagement with death. It enriched it. The underworld became not just a setting, but a laboratory for humanity's deepest questions. It wasn't merely the place souls went after death. It was the framework in which life itself was measured, questioned, and ultimately understood. In philosophical hands, the realm of Hades was demythologized, reframed as a moral and metaphysical space. In religious practice, it remained sacred and mysterious, transformed through symbol and ritual. The dialogue between these two approaches created a uniquely Greek legacy, a civilization unafraid to question even its oldest gods, yet unwilling to discard the truths their stories concealed. Hades evolved. No longer just the name of a god or place, it became a mirror, a space where human beings could confront the limits of knowledge, the reality of mortality, and the possibility of transcendence. It remained dark, but now that darkness was filled with wisdom. Whether through her Homeric tears, Platonic mathematics, Stoic acceptance, or mystical transformation, each approach reflected humanity's engagement with its own finitude. The realm of death, initially created to house mortal endings, had evolved into a mirror reflecting every culture's highest hopes and deepest fears about existence itself. As Roman civilization expanded, it absorbed and systematized Greek religious concepts while adapting them to distinctly Roman values and sensibilities. The underworld, now called various names including Orcus and eventually Pluto, underwent significant reinterpretation. Roman pragmatism reshaped mystical Greek ideas into structured, law-oriented visions of the afterlife. Rather than simply adopting Greek gods wholesale, Romans sought functional equivalents within their own pantheon, layering meaning rather than replacing it. Dispater, the Roman father of riches, originally governed underground wealth, both mineral and agricultural. His association with the fertility of soil naturally tied him to mortality through the cycle of death and renewal. As Greek influence deepened, Dispater absorbed the complexity of Hades while preserving his earthy roots. The name Pluto emerged as a particularly Roman innovation, emphasizing prosperity derived from the underworld. This dual identity as ruler of death and source of wealth resonated with Roman values that connected material success with divine favor. Temples to Pluto sometimes functioned as banks, where treasures were stored under divine protection, literally merging godly guardianship with economic security. Cerberus retained his basic traits, but was given Latin names like triceps and reimagined with iron collars, emphasizing his role as a savage guardian. The Romans formalized appeasement rites, introducing honey cakes called soups into funerary practice. These rituals, more codified than in Greek tradition, reflected the Roman preference for legal precision even in death. The ferryman Charon also persisted, now rendered with distinctly Roman features. Roman art accentuated his ghastly visage, more than the Greeks had, underscoring death's alienation from beauty and youth. The requirement of an obol evolved into specific Roman coin denominations, integrating afterlife preparation into the imperial economy. Roman understanding of the underworld was crystallized in Virgil's Aeneid, a text that would shape Western conceptions of death for millennia. His systematic portrayal blended Greek geography with Roman structure, producing the most detailed classical map of the afterlife. His entry point, Lake Avernus in Campania, offered a volcanic landscape rich with sulfur and eerie mist, aligning Roman sacred geography with mythic access to the divine. At the entrance to the underworld, Virgil placed a vestibule filled with personified abstractions: grief, care, disease, fear, hunger, and death itself, each a symbolic herald of the soul's journey. These figures emphasize the psychological burden of death before mythological encounters even began. The Sibyl of Cumae, guiding Aeneas through these regions, embodied Rome's synthesis of Greek prophecy and Etruscan death lore. Her role was not only that of a guide, but of a teacher, revealing moral lessons embedded in geography. Every region of the underworld became a mirror, reflecting the virtues and vices of mortal life. Virgil's depiction of judgment moved beyond myth into Roman legalism. Minos still passed verdicts, but now with evidence, testimony, and context mirroring earthly courtrooms. Through this lens, the underworld no longer operated on divine whim, but on careful judicial deliberation. In this Romanized cosmos, even death was subject to order, precedent, and meaning. Roman funeral customs evolved from humble agricultural rites into increasingly elaborate ceremonies that reinforced social hierarchy while honoring the dead. These rituals were not just moments of grief, but structured acts of civic and familial affirmation, blending ancestor veneration with mythology of the underworld. From the moment of death, precise actions were undertaken. The deceased's eyes and mouth were closed, symbolically containing the soul until final rites were performed. The name of the departed was called 3 times, a ritual that served both spiritual and practical purposes, testing against premature burial and initiating the separation between life and death. Coins were placed in the mouth, doubling as Charon's fare and as protection against awakening in a tomb. Funeral processions embodied Roman ideals of public dignity. Wealthy families hired professional mourners, musicians, and even actors wearing wax masks, imagines, of illustrious ancestors, connecting the present death with a legacy of public service. These performances underscored that personal mortality reinforced familial and societal continuity. Tombs, once simple grave markers, evolved into grand mausoleums that mirrored temples, becoming lasting bridges between the living and the dead. Inscriptions often spoke to passing strangers, preserving memory and inviting libations to nourish the soul. The festival of Parentalia, lasting 9 days in February, institutionalized ancestor worship. Families gathered at tombs, offering bread, wine, salt, and flowers, and shared symbolic meals, reinforcing bonds across generations. This public remembrance transformed Greek underworld myths into a Roman civic religion. Mythology was refitted to align with Roman values. Persephone became Proserpina. Her queenly power diminished in favor of her role as a dutiful daughter. The myth of her abduction was reimagined as a familial disruption and restoration, with Demeter, Ceres, grieving not as a divine force but as a Roman mother. The agricultural symbolism of the myth was emphasized over its mystical aspects, aligning with Roman concerns about seasonal abundance. Mercury inherited Hermes' psychopomp duties, but took on Roman characteristics. He carried accounting tablets, reflecting bureaucratic efficiency in managing souls. The underworld was imagined not as a chaotic void, but a structured domain where spirits were cataloged and processed. Even the Furies, once terrifying agents of vengeance, were reshaped into the Dire, celestial prosecutors reporting crimes to divine authorities, embodying Roman faith in legal order over emotional retribution. Hecate, guardian of crossroads, retained her liminality but gained domestic significance. Romans built Hecateia, triadic shrines at road junctions, complete with specific offerings and rituals that wove her into daily religious life. Underworld myth also supported the Roman imperial cult. Deified emperors required symbolic frameworks to bridge their mortal governance and divine status. The underworld, with its connections to wealth and cosmic transition, offered a powerful metaphor. Pluto and Dispater lent imperial authority sacred weight by underscoring rulers' connection to subterranean riches and their spiritual ascension. Imperial funerals were state ceremonies, signifying the transformation of rulers into celestial patrons. The practice of apotheosis, the elevation of emperors to godhood, demanded a fusion of Greek afterlife imagery and Roman political theology. Such souls didn't simply vanish into myth. They entered a version of Elysium, not merely as blessed souls, but as eternal embodiments of Roman potential and divine sanction. They ascended directly to divine status, bypassing the ordinary pathways of judgment and purification. This exaltation, reserved for emperors and legendary figures, established a precedent that influential Romans might aspire to follow, linking virtuous public life with extraordinary posthumous reward. It was more than myth, it became a model for civic legacy. Roman poets seized upon underworld motifs to comment on contemporary politics, celebrating noble deaths or condemning moral decay. Heroes became emblems of civic virtue, while corrupt sons were imagined writhing in Tartarus's depths. The malleable nature of myth allowed authors to veil political critique in timeless narrative, making the realm of the dead a stage for the moral struggles of the living. Roman reinterpretation transformed the chaotic and symbolic Greek afterlife into a systematic religious structure that upheld imperial ideology while preserving individual meaning. Death became more Roman, ordered, entwined with material wealth, inseparable from family and civic duty. Yet beneath the marble temples and legalistic visions, ancient mysteries lingered. The Shadow Realm, once a primordial abyss, had become one of humanity's most enduring symbolic systems, capable of mirroring cosmic order and personal introspection alike. Through centuries of empire, the myth evolved from chaos to cosmos, from epic tale to philosophical framework, and it did not end with the fall of Rome. As Christianity spread across the Mediterranean, it encountered the deeply entrenched mythology of the underworld. Church fathers did not dismiss these tales outright. Instead, they repurposed them, integrating what aligned with biblical teachings and reframing what conflicted. Tartarus, once home to the punished Titans, became a metaphor for hell, its punishments perfectly suited to Christian imagination. Tantalus, reaching forever for fruit he could never grasp, became a symbol of the soul yearning for salvation without repentance. Sisyphus's endless labor captured the futility of works performed without faith. Greek moral precision became scaffolding for Christian moral theology. The concept of purgatory drew heavily from Greek ideas of purification. The belief that souls might be cleansed through suffering rather than assigned immediately to heaven or hell offered a balance of justice and mercy. It satisfied both philosophical rigor and pastoral compassion, allowing for salvation to be a journey rather than a binary fate. Christianity also preserved the Greek vision of paradise. Elysium's serenity became heaven's promise. Even Christ's descent into hell to rescue the righteous echoed the heroic catabasis, the noble descent into darkness not for self but for others. Augustine, the great theologian of the early church, engaged deeply with classical thought. He did not simply reject Platonic ideas of the soul's purification. He argued that such insights, while incomplete, pointed toward the full truth revealed in the gospel. The medieval world inherited this synthesis. In Dante's Divine Comedy, the fusion reaches its pinnacle. Virgil, the Roman poet, becomes guide through a Christian cosmos. Greek geography maps the structure of sin. Roman order provides logic to divine punishment. Medieval metaphysics imbues it all with transcendent urgency. The rivers of the underworld flow again, now alongside the moral rivers of conscience and eternal consequence. Guardians, judges, gates, and trials all survive, reanimated through the lens of Christian salvation history. The classical dead yield their thrones to Christian saints, but their symbols endure. Even Arthurian legends absorb this legacy. Knights' quests into enchanted otherworlds drew upon Greek and Celtic visions of Hades, now transformed into trials of the soul. Descent, testing, and return, once mythic structures, became spiritual metaphors. The journey to the underworld was no longer just a crossing into death, but a pilgrimage through self and sin. In the visual arts, this synthesis found vivid form. Painters and sculptors drew upon classical iconography, three-headed Cerberus, the winding rivers, the somber boatman, not merely for decoration, but to anchor moral themes in recognizable form. These echoes of the ancient underworld continued to inform Western thought, silently shaping the moral imagination of centuries. From Homer to Virgil, from Augustine to Dante, the underworld was never only about death, it was about what it means to live well, to die rightly, and to hope beyond the grave. Medieval illuminated manuscripts depicted hell's geography with astonishing architectural precision, often exceeding that of classical sources. Artists like Bosch envisioned intricate underworld landscapes where classical monsters mingled with Christian torments, crafting imagery that was both educational and horrifying. These works warned audiences of moral failure while guiding them toward spiritual vigilance. Mystery plays brought these underworld dramas directly to town squares, embodying complex theological ideas in dramatic form. Audiences watched the soul's passage from judgment through purification to its final destination, encountering both biblical and mythological figures en route. These performances bridged oral storytelling, Christian instruction, and pagan inheritance, anchoring myth and communal experience. During the Renaissance, renewed interest in classical texts revived underworld imagery in its original mythological context. Humanists recovered Greek sources long obscured by medieval filtering, restoring the psychological and religious nuance of ancient visions of death. Artists like Michelangelo drew upon these motifs with theological insight. His Last Judgment famously features Charon ferrying souls across the Acheron, proving that classical symbols, rightly interpreted, could serve Christian revelation rather than contradict it. This was not a fearful syncretism, but a confident synthesis. Literature of the period expanded the role of the underworld from doctrinal tool to psychological metaphor. Shakespeare's ghosts dwell in thresholds between peace and vengeance, echoing both Hades and purgatory. Marlowe's Faust bargained with classical demons in a Christian framework, creating complex dramatic tension through competing cosmologies. The Renaissance also initiated deeper psychological exploration of underworld symbolism. The soul's dark night, the descent into madness, the pursuit of self-knowledge, all drew upon centuries of underworld tradition. Alchemical texts describe transformation through dissolution and death, using underworld metaphors to depict inner rebirth. Scholars like John Dee revived necromantic practices, claiming continuity with ancient mysteries while dressing them in Christian language. The Romantic era reimagined the underworld as a metaphor for the unconscious. Poets saw in Orpheus's descent a model for the artistic process to bring beauty from darkness without destroying it in the act of revealing. Goethe's Faust recast these elements into psychological drama, where temptation and transformation reflected the soul's interior conflict. Gothic literature made this emotional terrain literal. Catacombs, ruined temples, echoing corridors, these became externalizations of the mind's shadow. The underworld no longer symbolized distant theology, but intimate dread and wonder. William Blake radicalized this inward turn. His mythologies transformed classical deities into inner archetypes, portraying the soul as both heaven and hell. The descent became introspective. Death's domain mirrored personal struggle, not divine geography. Later theorists like Coleridge and Keats argued that mythology encoded early human attempts to make sense of consciousness itself. The underworld stood for the pre-rational abyss from which identity emerges. This movement marked a turning point, away from literal belief towards symbolic truth. In modernity, the classical underworld remains vital. Jungian psychology embraced it as a structure for understanding archetypes and individuation. The hero's descent represents not just death, but self-discovery. Facing monsters and trials in the depths becomes metaphor for integration of the unconscious. Popular culture now recycles these motifs endlessly. Films, novels, video games, all draw on ancient patterns of descent, ordeal, and return. The journey through the underworld remains one of storytelling's most enduring forms. It reminds us that confronting death, literal or symbolic, is essential to transformation. From illuminated parchment to interactive screen, the underworld continues to evolve, but its core truth endures. To know ourselves, we must walk through darkness. The RPG genre especially gratifies players by allowing them to enact heroic descents, confront underworld guardians, and emerge transformed. These interactive narratives resonate with patterns shaped millennia ago, patterns that once found ritual expression in mystery cults and now re-emerge in virtual realms. Such journeys satisfy psychological needs not through doctrine, but through experience. Literature, too, continues to mine the symbolic depths of the underworld. Milan Kundera explores memory's labyrinthine pull, Toni Morrison reanimates trauma through ghostly presence, and Haruki Murakami layers Tokyo's subways with mythic resonance. These stories demonstrate that the ancient descent still speaks to contemporary anxieties about identity, grief, and transformation. Visual arts draw knowingly from this symbolic reservoir. Modern installations may juxtapose Cerberus with surveillance systems, inviting us to consider who guards the thresholds of modern life. These reinterpretations assume cultural memory, even as they interrogate it. Music across genres invokes the same metaphors. Progressive rock chronicles Orphic odysseys. Hip-hop invokes Tartarian imagery to critique systems of oppression. Across disciplines, death's domain remains a resource for expression, critique, and catharsis. The Greek underworld's evolution, from mythic space to symbolic framework, reveals something profound. Humanity never abandoned its deepest questions. Instead, we changed the languages we used to ask them. What once explained death now decodes life. The underworld offered not only answers, but methods: descent, confrontation, purification, return. These methods persist, disguised as therapy, initiation, artistic struggle, or existential reflection. Its durability across epics, from Homeric song to Christian theology, from Dante's allegory to Jungian theory, testifies to its universal relevance. When psychologists speak of shadow work, when artists speak of reaching into darkness for truth, when individuals seek rebirth through confrontation with inner pain, they echo the same mythic path traced in Hades. The underworld journey survives because it maps internal terrain that transcends time. It shows that growth requires facing what we fear, that wisdom emerges not from escape, but engagement. The realm of death became the map of the mind. Its symbols, rivers, trials, guardians, judgments, still hold meaning because they reflect psychic experience. The realm beneath has become the depths within. It remains powerful not in spite of our modernity, but because our complexity still needs its clarity. Thus, the Greek underworld is no mere historical artifact. It is a mirror, a mythic compass, a psychological architecture that has guided humanity from ancient darkness to existential illumination. From the edge of chaos to the threshold of transformation, it remains the language through which we tell the truth about mortality, memory, and meaning. In this light, death's domain reveals not finality, but metamorphosis. What began as a shadowed prison becomes a chamber of reflection, a crucible for insight, a silent teacher of what it means to live. The dark sovereign who once ruled endings unknowingly governed beginnings. His realm has become our metaphor for the journey that matters most, the one within. And now, having followed the arc from myth to metaphor, from history to selfhood, from fear to understanding, we arrive at the final threshold. But there is no ending here, only invitation. The invitation to reflect, to descend inward, to engage with your own underworld, not as a place of dread, but as a forge of transformation. If this journey has stirred something within you, curiosity, recognition, the pull of questions too long avoided, then don't stop here. Let this not be a conclusion, but a call. Read deeply, so else courageously, descend honestly, and return changed. The underworld endures because it belongs not just to and myths, but to all who seek truth in shadow. Its wisdom waits, still in silence, for you.